Hello anime fan, welcome back to What If Animes 2.0. So in this video you gonna see, what if Naruto was ordered to marry multiple girls to revive his clan? This is part 2, and if you want more then hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. So let's get in the video and do check out the author of the story. Just a legend here, speech, thinking, Kyuubi. Inner self. Naruto eventually got to finish his date with Sakura, but not after Tenten and Sakura's fight escalated. Naruto had finally managed to get home, and as he sneaked through the apartment he carefully cracked his door open, making sure there was no one waiting for him this time. He sighed with relief when there was no one in his room. He then heard a knock at the door, and sighed softly. He dragged his feet behind him as he walked to the door and opened it slightly, and his face turned pale as he saw Gaara standing there. Naruto, what's this I heard about you dating Temari? Boy, Gaara didn't sound amused. He sounded as amused as Kakashi when someone took Icha paradise. Gaara, I can explain. Naruto was tired, very tired, and Gaara decided now was the time to talk as he used his sand, albeit weaker now, to push the door open. Then, explain. The unamused redhead walked in and sat down at the kitchen table. Naruto quickly sat down, keeping a safe distance from Gaara. I already know about the polygamy deal, but my problem is, you. Naruto rubbed his temples, afraid of what Gaara would say next. He knew Gaara had a temper that matched Yuya's, and that in itself was scary. You didn't ask me to set you up. At this, Naruto's jaw hung open in shock before his face hit the table. This couldn't have been any stranger. Gaara wasn't amused that Naruto didn't ask for help. Naruto, you are going to make me the best man for the upcoming wedding, right? Naruto just chuckled at this and smiled at his best friend. Of course I am. Gaara, you're my best friend. With that the two laughed. No one had ever really heard Gaara laugh in a natural way. Only Naruto had ever heard this. The next day, Naruto had been free of harassment for a change, so he decided to go check out the mansion since he would be living here quite soon. He heard a rustling in the nearby tree, and he looked up to see several of his friends hiding in the tree. Shikamaru, shouldn't you be laying in the grass watching the clouds, or something? Not with Ino acting so psycho. How troublesome. I pity whoever ends up teaching the children you two spawn, hyper and bossy. The lazy bum said before muttering about how it was a drag. Naruto shook his head, and threw a pebble at Shikamaru, knocking the bum out of the tree. What the hell, Naruto? The lazy Shikamaru didn't enjoy injuring his pride. I have enough on my plate today without you guys getting me dragged into decorating for my wedding. When he finished that sentence he received glares from Shino, Choji, Shikamaru, and Kiba. Get him. He should be the one stuck with Bridezilla all the time. Kiba loudly shouted. Naruto's face turned pale as he saw four of his friends cracking their knuckles ready to give Naruto a beat down. Author's note. I felt like a Benny Hill chase scene, so if you know the music, picture it being played. Naruto quickly spun on his heel and began to run away, as the four angry friends. He skidded as he rounded a corner and continued onward, trying to get away from them. Fortunately, alley was too wide for Akamaru and Kiba to run down, so they ran around to the other side of the alley and blocked it off. Naruto skidded to a stop and looked left and right as Kiba came from one side, Shino, Shikamaru, and Choji from the other. He quickly ran up the side of one of the buildings, just in the nick of time as the four pursuers crashed right into each other. The four quickly followed him up to the rooftops and began to chase after him again. And as they passed a billboard, Naruto pulled away a cloak that he used to hide with as they chased his clone, and laughed in a cheeky manner. The four turned and saw Naruto and began to chase him again. Naruto then jumped down into the street and began running faster, weaving between people trying to get away. He couldn't avoid crashing into a hugging Lee and Guy, and after the four pursuers passed the knockdown Lee and Guy, they too joined in the chase. Of course they shouted something about the flames of youth. Just then the pursuit passed Ino, Sakura, Temari, Tenten, and Hinata, causing them to give chase too. The five women looked absolutely furious as they began to chase those that wanted to hurt Naruto, even Hinata. And when the Hyuga heiress is angry, watch the fuck out. Just then the Naruto they had all been chasing vanished. It turned out to be another Kage Bunshin, and the pursuit stopped. Except for Guy and Lee, who kept running until they were standing in midair, and they looked down for a moment then looked back. Would you believe it? The two said in monotone as they fell down to the river below. It would seem that Naruto was still the ultimate trickster. Meanwhile at the Hokage Tower, Okay Ba-chan. I'm here. And with that Tsunade sent him flying into the wall with a flick to the forehead. Stop calling me that. I am not old. The Godem Hokage said with a twitching eye. Now sit down and be good until she gets here. Naruto sat down in a chair, rubbed his forehead. Even if he could regenerate, it still hurt. It wasn't like he possessed Guy's weird thick skull. His attention turned to a young girl who had just entered the room. When he saw her Hite 8 he began to freak out. A ninja from Kumogakure, what the hell was going on? The Cloud Ninja were enemies, or so he thought. Naruto, it's been decided that you shall marry Yugito ni, the girl sitting to your right, in 3 weeks. This is simply a political marriage to ensure a ninja war doesn't happen between the two villages. The Godem knew that this would be a chaotic situation. She could tell by the way the two were looking at each other they didn't really trust the other. This is the fearsome Uzumaki? He's no older than I am. The girl coldly and arrogantly made her point as she glared at Naruto. Well, excuse me, I didn't know you were expecting some stoic, possibly closet case. You have to look underneath the underneath. Naruto grinned at her and didn't even stop when she glared at him. Naruto, show Yugito around the village for a while, help her get situated in her new home. Tsunade prepared to flick his forehead again if he tried to argue his way out of it. Hi, Hokage-sama. Naruto felt a chill run down his back when he was being polite to the old hag. But he didn't need another flick to the forehead. He stood up and walked to the door slowly. I'm ready whenever you are. Alright Uzumaki, but my safety is in your hands. Don't screw up, the girl coldly said as she walked out the door. Naruto quickly followed her. He didn't trust her very much. He felt like she would try to kill him while he slept. Sometime later, okay, so I showed you the clothing store, the grocery store, the training grounds, the hospital, weapons store, and now the pinnacle of the village, Ichiraku Ramen. Naruto was glad the tour of the village was finally over. And what are those two? The blonde Kunoichi asked as she pointed at Konoha's strong yet most embarrassing ninja in another hug fest. My advice is try to ignore them when they do stuff like that. It's painful to watch. He gave a somewhat sarcastic look as he looked away from them. Just then Lee ran up to Yugito and went into the good guy pose. You are a vision of beauty. Will you be my girlfriend? The disturbingly energetic taijutsu expert proclaimed. At this Yugito just blinked looking at the buggy-eyed Jonin. He was unusual, very, very unusual. Sorry, I'm engaged. She grabbed hold of Naruto's arm and pulled him close to her. This would be the only way to get the creepy, bug-eyed, and overly energetic ninja away from her. I see. That is why you are my eternal rival Naruto. Your fires of youth burn more brightly than mine. I must try to be as youthful as you. With that the annoying Lee ran off and began to run laps around the village. Naruto and Yugito simply watched with horror. I hope that weirdo will leave me alone now. Yugito didn't want to admit, but her skin crawled at the fact a guy with giant eyebrows was hitting on her. Maybe marrying this apparent dolt named Naruto wasn't so bad. Elsewhere. This Sunday. Watch as we present Bridezilla vs. everyone. Kiba, get the podium in place. Shino, stop playing with beetles and help set up the chairs. Sakura, stop daydreaming about Naruto and do something helpful. And Gaara, you just keep on doing whatever it is you're doing. Ino was once again ordering everyone around as she continued to be in Bridezilla mode. Ino, calm down. You're starting to sound like a certain redhead, only you're not cussing yet. A dark-haired girl calmly said as she tried to mediate some peace in the clearing-turned-wedding hall. Kin, I don't think that's such a good idea. 1, Ino is always this bossy, and 2, Tayuya is right behind you. Now your life wasn't saved by Naruto just so Tayuya could kill you 7 years later. Choji quietly said before being struck over the head with a folding chair by Ino. Who are you calling bossy? Ino was on the rampage. Fortunately Sakura snuck up and administered some sedative. This fortunately gave them a sigh of relief. When Ino sat down in a chair, acted calmer. Okay, we have 2 hours before Bridezilla returns. Get the chairs set up, get the decorations put in place, and for the love of the will of fire, get them set up according to her plan. The pink-haired Kunoichi gave out the orders, then her attention shifted to Tenten sneaking away. Where do you think you are going? I have to get started cooking dinner for Naruto. Tenten then vanished, leaving a swirl of leaves. Sakura's eye twitched, simply because it took every fiber of her being to not attack Tenten. Shaw, who the hell does she think she is? It's bad enough I have to share Naruto with Ino Pig, and the most timid girl in the village, but now ten. If I had my way, Naruto would be mine and mine alone. The inner Sakura was on a rampage. Sakura was still twitching with anger. And back with Naruto and Yugito. I guess I can stomach being married to you. It would seem you aren't as moronic as I had pegged you for. The blonde girl didn't seem to hold any punches. Despite the fact he acts like an idiot. He seems to be very warm, something I never felt in Kumogakure. No, I have to keep focused on the mission. The Raikage once Konoha's Uzumaki dead. Her thoughts were troubled and conflicted. She would have to kill Naruto, but she didn't see why. From all she could see, he was just a warm, compassionate man. Well, he practices polygamy, that's a bit weird, but other than that he's a nice guy. She would have to worry about the complications later. She could simply not go through with it. She was after all outside the Raikage's sphere of influence. I better show you home, Yugito. I have to be somewhere in a little bit. He froze in place when she glared at him. The very fact that he had a prior engagement seemed to make the Nibby's container exude immense jealousy. I will see you tomorrow though, so please don't be too angry. Okay then, Naruto, you better keep your word, because I will find you and hold you to that promise. She smirked as he walked her to her accommodations. She didn't know why, but he seemed to respond well to threats, but that's because she didn't know about the other women in his life. Once they reached her apartment, she walked in and slammed the door in his face. Have a nice day, Yugito. He scratched his head in shock of what she just did. He thought she was warming up to him, but yeesh, that was harsh. He then decided to get ready for his dinner date with Tenten while he could. Hours later at Tenten's house, Naruto knocked at the door. He had a bouquet of flowers. He was ever the gentleman, especially when around Tenten, who was one of his closest friends. When the door opened, he was visibly drooling. Not from the smell of good cooking, no, it was because Tenten was the vision of beauty. Who would have known that if she let her hair down, and wore a Chung-sam, Chinese dress, she would be beyond beautiful. Naruto-kun? Hello? Tenten waved a hand in front of Naruto's face. She never knew this would happen. Hey, sorry about that, Ten-chan. He smiled, a tad embarrassed of his drooling. Not that there was anything to be ashamed of. It just made him look a tad perverted, but given the fact that Tenten was a beauty under normal circumstances. Naruto just never saw her well dressed up. And there it happened, he began to stammer much like the lovely Hyuga heiress. Yul look very lovely Ten-chan. He blushed and handed her the bouquet of flowers. Tenten giggled and took the bouquet of flowers from Naruto. In all her years she had never seen him so shy. Hell, no one had ever seen him this nervous or quiet without food or Ino around. It was for the most part funny. She then took his hand and led him into her apartment. She made him sit down on the couch and smiled sweetly at him. Sit there. I have to finish cooking supper. Naruto nodded while still blushing. He wondered if he had this kind of effect on Hinata, since she was prone to stuttering and blushing when he was around. He found that Tenten was having that effect on him. It was amazing, he had never seen Tenten in that light ever, but now she was a vision of beauty. Naruto realized the one thing that made him think. Her name was Tenten and his birthday is October 10th. If he was like Neji once was, he would think it was destiny. Just then Naruto's eyes were covered. He leaned his head back and smiled softly. I wonder who is covering my eyes. He rubbed his chin and smiled happily. He knew it could only be the beautiful Tenten. Could it be the beautiful girl who invited me to dinner? Tenten giggled as she moved around to the front while keeping Naruto's eyes covered. She then sat on his lap and smiled sweetly as she uncovered his eyes. The food was ready, but she wouldn't pass up this chance to spend some much-needed time with Naruto. She wouldn't get another chance like this. She leaned in slowly and planted a soft, affectionate kiss on his lips. Dinner is ready, but I want to spend time with you. She smiled sweetly as she nuzzled her face into the blonde's neck. She seemed to be enjoying this moment for all it's worth. She looked deep into his eyes and smiled. She saw something that she could never see in the Hyuga prodigy's kindness. This was exactly what attracted her to Naruto, in the first place. Let's have dinner, then we can return to this. Tenten smiled as she got off of Naruto's lap and helped him to his feet. She then led him to the table. There was quite the meal in front of them, all Chinese dishes, which was no surprise since Tenten seemed to enjoy the Chinese culture. And the two of them began to eat. The meal was quite loved by the blonde, as Tenten had expected. The two of them were now sitting on the couch. Naruto's arm was around her shoulder, and Tenten was practically glowing with happiness. She then moved so she was straddling his lap, her eyes were looking deep into his as she leaned close and kissed him deeply. Naruto ran his fingers through her hair as he returned the kiss. His face turned red when Tenten started to kiss his neck. "Ten-chan, we better stop before we go too far." He was cut off when Tenten put a finger to his lips. "I won't hear any of that, Naruto Uzumaki." She grabbed his hand and led him to her room. Now this would not be the first time the Kyuubi container had done something intimate with a girl. In fact, Naruto's first time was with his fiancée, one Ino Yamanaka. It was a few months back, but that's a special SS class secret that no one needs to hear about, especially her father. "I want for you to make love to me tonight, Naruto-kun. I love you, and I know that if I didn't dance around the subject I would have been your girlfriend sooner. So please do this for me. I want you to be my first." Needless to say, that night there was a fair amount of racket coming from Tenten's apartment. Of course, the good news was Tenten's apartment was soundproofed, so not much of the noise escaped. This hopefully wouldn't come around to bite him on the ass, hopefully. The next day. At some point, Naruto and Tenten had spent a good part of the night making love. Tenten was sleeping soundly, and with a smile on her face that put us to shame. It was safe to say that Naruto did a good job. He was also sound asleep, meaning for the first time he might have become exhausted. All he knew was he enjoyed it, and he didn't know some of the things they did were even possible. "Wake up, Naruto-kun. It's already noon." The brunette cooed softly as she tried to wake Naruto up. She quickly gave up though and just snuggled close. It was too comfortable to bother not being like this. She then closed her eyes and just continued to rest with her lover, feeling complete when she was with him. It was futile to even bother getting out of bed, but then paradise was lost when Guy and Lee made a dynamic entrance into her room. "Guy-sensei. Tenten has done something most unyouthful." Lee cried out in shock to find his teammate and friend sharing the same bed. "Don't look, Lee. Tenten has done something she should have waited until she was married to do." Guy quickly commented before the two hugged and began to cry. This was enough to wake Naruto up. His eyes had gone Kyuubi. No, wait, he was just tired. "Get out of this room now or I will hit you with Futon Rasengan." Naruto quickly threatened as he sat upwards. This of course caused Lee and Guy to leave Tenten's apartment in fear. Naruto muttered about idiots in spandex and snuggled close to Tenten, wanting to get some rest. The next day, Naruto, having fully rested up, left Tenten's apartment early at the crack of noon. He hadn't expected that to tire him that much, but it had. He was hoping he wouldn't run into Yugito though. He promised to spend yesterday with her, but considering the situation it couldn't be helped. Then it happened. She grabbed him by the collar of his coat and dragged him away. "You owe me a date, Naruto." "Yes, Yugito dear," he sighed as she dragged him off. Another day, another impossibly crazy situation. Speaking of which, he had promised to Yuya he would meet her for drinks tonight. He better get something for the hangover then. "This place looks good." She pointed to the sign, and Naruto saw it was the sushi restaurant, not exactly his cup of tea. But if it would make her chill out, then so be it. Once in the restaurant, Naruto looked at the menu for a while and just decided to go with whatever looked best. "I saw the freaks running out of your girlfriend's house, screaming about unyouthful things, so I knew you were there. I could have dragged you up there, but the container of the Nekomata blushed deep red. She simply didn't feel ready to see him naked. "But if you stand me up ever again, I will hurt you. You promised to take me to dinner yesterday after all." "Hi, I know, Yugito-chan. But I was really tired. I won't stand you up ever again." He was simply afraid that she would hurt him next time he did it. "Wait, did I just call her Yugito-chan? I hardly know her." He saw her face become a deeper shade of red. He then blushed softly. He wondered what it was about her that reminded him of a cat. There was the fact she had slanted eyes and a love of fish. "You sure like sushi, Yugito-chan? Like you have room to talk, Naruto-kun. I heard you inhale ramen like it's going out of style." She quipped with a smirk, then she realized she called him Naruto-kun. She had no clue why, but she was finding herself growing fond of this boy who looked like he was a fox. What she didn't know was she had more in common with him than that. Sometime later, after she had tried every kind of sushi, "Thank you for a wonderful day, Naruto-kun." She then kissed him on the cheek and walked off. Naruto just stood there staring in disbelief of what had just happened. The girl he just met had started to warm up to him. He checked his watch then and saw it was time to get to the bar for drinks with Tayuya. And he simply groaned some. He wondered how the redhead acted when she was drunk. Maybe he would be lucky and she would be a happy drunk. It after all did wonders for Tsunade. She seemed a lot friendlier when she was drunk, as long as you don't call her Bachan. At the bar. Naruto. About time you got here, numb nuts. That wasn't as bad as the usual insults she used. He saw the empty bottle of something on the bar and could only guess. He sat down next to her and asked for a bottle of tequila. Don't ask, I just like tequila, to whatever. Naruto cheerfully said and downed some of the strong alcohol, and he coughed slightly. Man, that shit burns. I knew I could corrupt ya sooner or laters. Tayuya's language was slurred slightly due to her inebriated state. Several rounds and toasts later, the duo slinked out of the bar, hanging off of each other. Naruto was less intoxicated than the redhead. Tayuya giggled like a schoolgirl as she looked at Naruto. Can ya keep a secret? I guess I can try. What's secret? Naruto stumbled some as he walked Tayuya home. He was starting to feel the alcohol, though slightly his metabolism worked a bit faster. I'm in love with a guy named Naruto. But, when I's around shim I just end up cushing it, I am and scarce him. She smiled in her drunken state. She then looked at Naruto and realized it was him and giggled again. Oops gosh, I told him, he. Tayuya's apartment the next morning. Needless to say, they finally reached her apartment. But the two were so drunk they threw all sense of restraint to the wind and ended up having sex that night. But now it was morning, and nothing like that reaction to knowing you did that with someone you didn't expect. The neighbors sure knew what was going on since the girl pretty much advertised it. Where am I? Naruto muttered quietly as he looked around the room. He then saw a female figure lying on top of him. He blushed, yet became ghostly pale at the same time. Not exactly how he wanted that evening to go. He had no plans of waking up in bed with Tayuya the next morning. He just hoped he didn't do anything stupid. The redhead looked up and saw Naruto under her, and she turned red, both in anger and embarrassment. She looked around for her flute to hit him over the head, but she couldn't find it. Just then she shouted 3 words, and 3 words alone. What the fuck? These of course were punctuated with 1 word said in unison. Ouch. The hangover was there, and it would seem even hangovers affected Jinchurikis. Naruto sighed and held his head. This was going to be a very strange day since tomorrow he was getting married. Hopefully nothing bad would stick with him today, cause this was a bad situation for him. Very bad. No one wanted to wake up next to Tayuya after a night of heavy drinking. Why did I suggest drinks? Man, I screwed up big this time, and Kyuubi, if you say it I will have the arrow sent and apply the 5 elements seal. Naruto sat up slowly, almost fell out of bed, but decided to lie back down. Why did he suddenly have to have such good luck with women? Naruto and Tayuya were looking away from each other. They were in shock of what had happened. Naruto was holding his head from the last rampaging cussing and threatening Tayuya had just gone through. Please not so loud, Tayuya-chan. It really isn't necessary to shout that much. Well, you're the one who fucked up and got us so drunk. Look what happened, we ended up fucking. Tayuya began to curse Naruto out again. She seemed to enjoy making Naruto suffer. It wasn't entirely his fault anyways. Partly it was her fault that she cussed so much, and a bar would be the only place she could cuss. Well, if you would clean your language up, I would have taken you to dinner. Naruto retorted as he looked over at the redhead and glared. She was always seemed to argue with Naruto, but it was her strange way of showing that she loved him. She didn't fight with anyone else, just Naruto. He seemed to be special. Tayuya sat up and looked at Naruto, giving him a strange look. It wasn't her normal pissed off expression. It was almost a lustful look. She then grabbed him by the back of the head and kissed him passionately. Naruto went wide-eyed by this action since he hadn't been expecting that. Apparently Tayuya liked conflict. She broke the kiss for a moment and looked at him, smiling in a seductive manner. I've been waiting for you to talk back to me. I can clean my language up if I wanted, but I was waiting to see you have what it takes to talk back to me. Tayuya said as she reached down under the covers and grabbed hold of Naruto's balls and smirked. You sure have the balls to talk back to me. That's good, cause the size matches your ballsiness. Lemony goodness warning. You have been warned. Naruto turned bright red in the face. This was getting freaky. He had no idea Tayuya was one of those girls who liked conflict. He apparently thought the girl was just vulgar and foul-mouthed. He never thought she could talk decently. His embarrassment deepened as he found himself becoming erect from her rubbing his balls. He hadn't expected that to happen. "Oh, so you are as turned on by this as I am," she lustfully said as she moved her hand to his hardening erection. She placed her delicate fingers around the shaft and began to pump it lightly. She smirked as she looked at him, become shocked by her actions. It would seem she was a bit impulsive. She then removed her hand, sitting up slowly as she looked at him with a grin on her face. "I don't remember last night, so how about we see if it was worth it?" "So, Naruto-kun, fuck me," Naruto shrugged. It would seem he really had no choice in the matter. He reached his hands upward and cupped her breasts lightly. Sure, she didn't have big breasts like Hinata, but they were just the right size. He squeezed Tayuya's right breast lightly as he laid her down on the bed. He leaned down and extended his tongue and ran it up the redhead's neck and grinned when he saw her become flush with excitement. His right hand drifted downward and rested on the redhead's thigh, and he caressed it lightly as he kissed her neck softly. Tayuya let out a low-pitched moan from the stimulation she was receiving. Naruto spread Tayuya's legs open and rubbed the head of his member against her wet entrance. He eased himself into her slowly. He smiled when he heard her moan out. Tayuya wrapped her arms around Naruto's neck as she nuzzled her face into his neck. That's when Naruto began to roll his hips forward, thrusting his length into her. She threw her head back and let out a high-pitched moan. She then lifted her head up and kissed him lustfully. As she parted the kiss, the sucked lightly on his lower lip. It was amazing that this tender act was all it took to get her to shut up some. "Oh, Naruto-kun on," she moaned out as she held fast to Naruto. She closed her eyes as Naruto began to thrust his hips faster, causing him to move deeper inside of her. He moved his hands behind her and held tightly to her shoulders as he intensified his thrusts. He bit down on the girl's shoulder, giving himself into the passion he was feeling. Tayuya was on the verge of screaming like a banshee. She was pressing herself against Naruto. She then screamed out loudly in passion as an earth-shattering orgasm washed over her. She moaned vulgarly as Naruto sped up the movement of his hips as he was on the verge of coming. He continued to roll his hips at a feverish pace as he was on the verge of coming. Then, with one last thrust, he pushed himself completely into his red-haired lover and came. He ejaculated, pumping his hot cum into her. He then slumped over on top of her, breathing heavily. "Was it good for you?" the blonde asked with a grin. "Lemony goodness has ended. All prudish people can continue reading now." He rolled over and stared at the ceiling for a moment before closing his eyes. He was startled somewhat when the redhead snuggled up against him. He then knew he wasn't hallucinating when the girl punched him in the arm. "I had no idea you were packing, shithead. And if I end up pregnant, you will marry me," she quickly threatened the blonde before kissing him softly. Naruto grinned sheepishly, only because he didn't like the tone she was using. It sounded more like a blackmail threat than a do-the-right-thing tone. Naruto sighed, knowing this was another complication in his life. As if things couldn't get more insane, Naruto knew they probably would. After Naruto had recovered, Naruto headed out the front door of Tayuya's apartment. He was whistling calmly. He had no fear whatsoever. Of course, it was around noon now, which meant he could go get lunch. He was walking along, his whistling had turned into humming when an unexpected occurrence popped up. The Hyuga heiress, normally shy and timid, grabbed hold of Naruto's arm. Naruto's face turned bright red when he felt her ample breasts push against his arm. He immediately began to fidget like she always did. This was a nerve-wracking situation. He couldn't keep the girls off him. He wondered why Hinata was being so bold. Maybe the thought of not having to be so worried around him gave her courage, who knows. "Naruto-kun, made you some lunch. IWW was hoping that we could have lunch together." The Hyuga heiress was still timid around the boy she had been in love with since Kami knows when. She then began to fidget, and the two stood there fidgeting. Someone would have to break the silence. It was considered a sign of the end times for Naruto to be quiet without him eating ramen. Over the years, Naruto had witnessed as Hinata went from being the cute girl who couldn't talk to him without fainting to being a beautiful girl who couldn't talk to him without fainting. He smiled cheerfully at her and kissed her cheek. He chuckled when he saw her face turn red in slow motion. "Thanks, Hinata-chan, I'm really hungry." He said this with the ever-present smile he was known for, but unlike the one he had over the years, it was genuine. Alright. See, come on, and Naruto." Hinata pulled on Naruto's arm, leading him off towards the Hyuga compound. Naruto simply act as Hinata lead him to the Hyuga compound. Naruto was wondering if This sudden boldness probably has something to do with the fact that Hinata and Ino were fast becoming friends. The thought of Ino influencing Hinata made Naruto feel like someone just walked over his grave. Of course, it wouldn't hurt for Hinata to be less shy and timid. In fact, it drove Naruto crazy whenever the girl stuttered. Yet her shy nature is what made her attractive. She was a nice contrast to the other women in the Naruto's life. In fact, if Naruto wasn't so certain that Hiashi would have killed him, he probably would have asked Hinata out on a date. Naruto found himself sitting at the end of a table. He half expected her family to be there to make judgments. He had of course been surprised by the meal Hinata had prepared. He simply blinked at what was in front of him. It amazed him that that sweet girl he knew was such a talented cook. He didn't expect such a feast from her. Ramen, steak, tempura, and onigiri for dessert. Naruto simply stared at the steak. He never saw it before. Hinata-chan, you really didn't have to do that much for me. Naruto shyly said. He just expected a meal of ramen. Naruto-kun, I in another week. We will be husband and www wife, so I want to make sure you are well fed. Hinata blushed as she finished that sentence. She then began her famous fidgeting as she looked at Naruto. She had her own food set in front of her, though her portions were much smaller than Naruto's. She smiled sweetly as she waited for Naruto to begin eating. She knew there was a risk with cooking him something he isn't used to. Naruto carefully cut into the steak. He had never had a steak, mostly because this was considered rich people food. He really never had the money to buy it, so he was going to enjoy it. He then chewed the meat. It amazed him simply because he had no idea steak was that good. Perhaps there were other foods beside ramen that were delicious. Wow, Hinata-chan, your cooking is great. Naruto managed to say, though almost muffled by him devouring the food. Arigato, Naruto-kun. She replied quietly as she quietly ate her meal. She was relieved that Naruto loved the meal, but she waited for him to try the ramen. She had her fair share of competition in the ramen area since she had heard Haku has a recipe, and she had heard that Naruto was engaged to a Yame Ichiraku, and Ichiraku was the best ramen stand in the village. In truth, Naruto had two types of women in his life, the anti-ramen establishment, and the make Naruto happy establishment. Ino was of course the leader of the anti-ramen group due to the fact she thought it was fattening and unhealthy. Hinata's eyes lit up with joy when Naruto began to eat the ramen she had prepared with great enjoyment. It was all she could have asked for. She didn't want her ramen to be better, but that it made Naruto happy. Naruto found that he really enjoyed the tempura. For some reason he liked the way deep-fried food tasted. It was after all the male factor. It was a known fact that guys liked greasy food. Eventually, I am impressed Naruto-kun. Why, you ate everything? Hinata gasped in amazement as she held her hands to her mouth. She hadn't expected Naruto to eat all that, including the extra she had prepared. Of course Naruto had eaten way too much. He was laying on back groaning. Too much food. He quietly muttered as he looked at the ceiling. At this rate he were going to be as fat or big-boned as Choji. Naruto-kun, why, you didn't really have to eat all of it. Hinata spoke with a concerned look on her face as she looked at Naruto. He was known to overdo it sometimes. Needless, Hinata wasn't surprised. She then gave him a digestive aid since she didn't want to see him in such discomfort, even if it was his entire fault. Once Naruto was feeling better, he sat up and pulled Hinata into a hug. Immediately her face turned bright red. She was shocked by this. She just blushed since she wasn't quite used to Naruto showing her affection. Love YYUN na Naruto-kun. She finally managed to say it, though she felt like fainting when she finished the sentence. I know, Hinata-chan. I somehow always knew, but you always fainted when I tried to talk to you. Naruto softly replied, as he held the ever-shy girl close. He felt her jump in shock and expected it. He had come to know her mannerisms. Don't be so jumpy, Hinata-chan. Naruto-kun. The white-eyed Hinata meekly replied to her fiancé. She looked up into his vibrant blue eyes timidly. Her heart felt like it was beating 1,000 times a minute. She would probably always stutter. It's what made her unique, but hopefully she would get over the habit of fainting all the time. I will try to stop fainting all the time, Naruto-kun. Thanks, it's kind of hard to talk to you when you faint all the time. Naruto cheerfully said with a grin on his face. He then kissed her ever so lightly, and stopped there since he expected her to freeze when he kissed her. The pale princess was turning the most interesting shade of red from the attention she was receiving from her first and only crush. Across town. Now which puppy will Naruto-kun just melt over? Hana Inuzuka was examining puppies from a litter of puppies. She was planning to win the boy over with a puppy. Guys usually do that with girls, so who says a girl can't do the same? She then spotted a tan and black colored puppy and smiled. You seriously think you have a chance, sis? I don't see why all you girls are crazy about him. Kiba muttered quietly. He was glad he finally had a reprieve from Bridezilla attacks, at least until Hyuga Bridezilla struck. Then again, Hinata is normally quiet. She couldn't be as horrible as Ino was. Or could she? Shut up, Kiba. You're just jealous because Hinata never saw you that way. Hana smirked as she picked up the puppy, which was probably the most adorable one of the litter. Kiba simply glared. He didn't like admitting he lost to Naruto even if the two had become friends. It drove him crazy that Naruto had turned out to be such a pimp. But maybe Kiba could score some of the overflow girls. It couldn't hurt to ask Naruto to send a few Kiba's way. Right now, if you will excuse me, I have to go track Naruto down. Hana then abruptly left with the small puppy in her arms. Kiba's eye twitched as he fell into a chair. This was beyond crazy. It was just like the days of the academy almost, except Naruto had become God's gift to women. Needless to say, Kiba was quite jealous. The plotting continues. Naruto had been leaving Hyuga compound when it happened. He felt a cold chill run down his spine. He felt killing intent. No, it was more frightening than that, girlfriend intent. The very thing Naruto justly feared, the unwanted attention of girls. He slowly turned to look at who was behind him, and he petrifies, long dark hair, with a girly ribbon. It was Kin. Naruto-kun. The dark-haired girl called out as she latched onto Naruto's arm. He only grumbled since he needed at least 10 minutes alone from the women. Is that so much to ask? A little time to be alone and think? Not that it was so bad getting affection from Kin. She was quite the looker, and she always was. Yes, Kin-chan. Naruto sighed softly. He was exhausted from everything today. He needed a nap. Before he could start to complain, he was being pulled away by the dark-haired girl. He groaned in exasperation. Relax, I'm just taking you somewhere so you can rest for a moment before Bridezilla gets a hold of you again. Kin calmly explained as she led Naruto off to someplace the army of girls would never think to look for Naruto, her apartment. Unlike some of the women, Kin was a bit more patient. After all, Naruto was someone she had her eye on for a while. So tired, so very tired, Naruto mumbled quietly. It was mostly his fault anyway, considering who he had been doing lately. Kin had helped him into her apartment and helped him lay down on the couch. She could only imagine how exhausted the normally energetic Naruto was. Naruto's head was resting in Kin's lap. Not like he could complain. All he knew was Kin was going to allow him to rest. When I first met you, I just thought you were a noisy, obnoxious, hyperactive runt. The dark-haired beauty began as she stroked Naruto's head affectionately, trying to get him relaxed so he could sleep. But when you dragged me out of that hospital room and hid me in your old apartment, at first I was upset, but when it turned out you saved me. I know. Naruto mumbled as looked up at the dark-haired girl. She was definitely calmer than Tayuya, which was good for Naruto. The calm ones balanced out the psychopaths, and Naruto surely attracted the psychopaths. Naruto felt his eyes growing heavy. This is nice. Naruto then gave into the comfort and drifted into a nap. There you go, Naruto-kun, just rest. I'll keep you safe from the crazy girls. Kin smiled and relaxed, letting Naruto rest. It was her little tactic to make Naruto fall for her. She smiled slyly since she could understand that Naruto needed some time away from the insanity. No more dating for you. Ino will kill you if you don't show up for the wedding tomorrow. And I won't get my chance to date you if she does that. Of course, out in the village there were girls stalking the streets looking for the knucklehead turned God's gift to Kunoichi. A cute medic nin wearing a black kimono, a wind mistress, a pink-haired beauty, a veterinarian with a puppy, and a psychopathic bride. Naruto was lucky Kin took him to the one place the lunatics would think to look. Naruto was safely tucked away, and Kin wasn't going to let anything bad happen to Naruto for now. Kin was a bit selfish like that, but what did you expect? Naruto was the most desired man in the village. It came with the territory, and Naruto couldn't do anything to stop it until he said no more, and he was a glutton for pain. For now the dates would have to wait. He was getting married tomorrow, and that was something to make sure to stay on top of. Still at Kin's apartment, Naruto had been able to rest for a few hours in the comfort that Kin had offered him. He then opened his eyes abruptly and sat up as he remembered he had a bachelor party to attend. You aren't going anywhere," Kin shouted out as she held Naruto fast, preventing him from escaping. But. Bachelor party. Naruto whined since he had hoped to go to the stripper-free bachelor party. The girl shot him a stern look and pointed to poster of Ino that Ino had made to strike fear into Naruto. It featured a grouchy-looking Ino cracking her knuckles with the words, "Don't be late," in large letters. She made that poster and put it over the village in case you got ideas about partying tonight and showing up late for the wedding. "She will destroy us all if you're late," Kin explained while she exclaimed about it. Of course Naruto cringed some since he knew his bride-to-be would rampage if he was late. "I never thought about it that way." Naruto didn't want to see Ino go berserk if he didn't show up. He wanted to avoid that at all costs, so he settled down on the couch. He figured the bachelor party could do well without him. "I bet you don't recognize this place anymore." Kin began for her apartment was in fact the apartment where Naruto had lived for a portion of his life until Haku and Zabuza had come to live in the village. It had indeed been changed in the years since he had lived there. Of course it was the feminine touch from Kin that made it much better. "At first it was hard getting used to life in the village, but I got used to the fact that daily life wasn't a test. Of course some villagers didn't like me at first because I was from Otogakure, but you helped me through those hard times when you came and helped me with my chores when you had free time." Naruto nodded his head and smiled softly at the dark-haired girl. It was true, he took care of Kin because he took it upon himself to help other people. He wanted to be the Hokage after all, and it was practice for him. It never dawned on him back then that Kin may have had feeling for him, but when her personality became more distant after he started to date Ino. He still had no idea that the girl was fond of him, but that was quickly clarified when the girl moved and straddled Naruto's lap, looking him dead in the eyes. "I still haven't thanked you for helping me out." Kin smiled softly and leaned forward, kissing Naruto softly on the lips. He didn't fight it, though he had come to terms with the fact he somehow became the pimp kid. He simply wrapped his arms around the girl as he returned the kiss softly, but that's when a knocking on the door was heard and the moment was killed. From the other side of the door barking was heard, which meant Hana had somehow managed to track down Naruto. "Open up, Kin. I know you have Naruto. I'm not going to molest him or anything. I just want to give him a puppy," Hana said through the door. Of course Naruto sighed in grief because a perfect moment was spoiled. Kin stood to her feet and walked to the door and looked through the peephole to make sure Hana was truthful on the matter. Sure enough, she was holding a puppy, so Kin opened the door to let Hana in. "Here you go, Naruto-kun. I wanted you to have the pick of the litter. He reminds me of you. Ambitious and energetic." She smiled sweetly as she handed Naruto the little puppy. The puppy immediately licked Naruto's cheek, causing Naruto to chuckle. Hana smiled and walked back to the door, keeping her word. "And if Bridezilla tells you, you can't keep him, tell me. I will give her a piece of my mind." Hana smiled as she walked out the door, leaving Naruto to blink some as he looked at the puppy. "What should I name you? How about Kamaboko?" Naruto grinned and Kin giggled since she thought it was funny how his mind was always fixated on ramen. The puppy just wagged its tail and yipped at Naruto happily. "Naruto-kun, you could give him a better name than that. Give him a name that doesn't sound like you were hungry." Kin knew Naruto was probably hungry, so she walked off to the kitchen and began to prepare some instant ramen. One of the finer things in life that Naruto got her indoctrinated to. Naruto was busy playing with the puppy. It was a total guy thing. Every guy wanted a puppy at some point. It was the perfect girl magnet too. He rubbed his chin in thought as he looked at the pup. "I'll just call ya Tayomaru." Naruto smiled and pet the pup's head. "That's a better name, Naruto-kun," Kin called out as she brought some instant ramen over to Naruto. It would also seem that all the women in his life would prevent him from doing stupid things, but that comes with every girl. They make sure men don't do something foolish. The two began to eat their instant ramen, though it wasn't as good as Haku or Ichiraku's ramen. But it was instant, and that was good enough as he inhaled it. Eventually Naruto finished his ramen. He had learned to slow down his eating since it was bad manners. "I better get going, Kin-chan. I have to get a good night's rest." Naruto yawned out as he stood up with Tayomaru fast asleep in his arms. He of course used henge to transform into a disguise that would allow Him to get home fast. The form he chose was that of the guy girls didn't want to chase anymore. Sasuke Uchiha. Now remember, act emo, act like you're better than everyone. And we can get home with ease. Naruto told himself mentally as he began to walk out the door. Naruto made his trek home with no problem, and when he reached the front door he released the transformation and grinned walking inside. Of course, once he got inside there was a squeal from Haku at the puppy he was holding. It's so cute. Haku clasped her hands together and looked at the puppy Naruto was holding. The pup quirked one of its ears as Naruto raised one of his eyebrows. Haku, I never saw this side of you. It's so, well, girly? Naruto bluntly said as Haku blushed deep crimson since she had never acted so girly ever. Naruto handed the puppy over to her so she could hold it since she thought it was so cute. His name is Tayomaru. So cute. Haku squealed yet again as she cuddled the puppy as she held it. Naruto just blinked at the peculiar way his roommate turned girlfriend was acting. He shrugged it off and walked to his room and crawled into bed. Tomorrow he was getting married, so he had to get some rest. The next morning, Naruto fell out of his bed as it had been established he hated morning. He dragged himself to the bathroom and knocked this time. He looked down the hall and saw Haku playing with Tayomaru, so he walked into the bathroom and took care of getting cleaned up. He didn't have to exactly leave for the place the wedding was taking place for a few hours. So how was he going to kill the time? Training was a question, eating ramen too. What could he do? His eyes were wandering over to Haku every time he was trying to think of something. Gah, Ero Sennin has infected me with lecherous thoughts. Naruto began to mentally scream at himself. Then in the mindscape of Naruto. Come on kid, you know you want to have your way with her. The Kyuubi roared out as Naruto began to twitch his right eye. He was getting tired of this overly horny fox telling him to do things. Shut up you perverted fox. Ino would kill me if I got laid before the wedding. Naruto responded as he glared at the fox. He was getting tired of the constant perversion from every direction. Back in reality, arg, I'm so bored, how am I gonna kill 2 hours? Naruto yelled in frustration as he held onto his head. Haku began to grin. She had a few ideas how the two of them could kill a few hours. Of course Naruto began to feel a chill down his spine. He didn't feel comforted by that grin. Oh Naruto-kun, I know how we can kill some time, it's something I've been wanting for a while. She grabbed hold of Naruto's arm and pulled him into her room. No. No. Naruto cried, but it was too late. There was no escaping the clutches of the beautiful young woman he lived with. 1.5 hours later, oh yeah. Naruto and Haku were lying in bed next to each other. Naruto was staring at the ceiling with a stupid grin on his face. Hey, I may end up dead, but at least I'll be happy. Naruto replied. For someone who didn't like the idea in the first place, he felt mighty proud of himself. Haku snuggled close to Naruto. She smiled contentedly as if she had fulfilled her wildest dreams. Naruto-kun, you're an animal. Haku quietly commented, looking a bit flushed from the activity. But the moment was quickly over as Naruto saw what time it was and rushed to the bathroom to clean up. He couldn't very well show up smelling like he just had sex. Haku sighed and stared at the ceiling. She didn't like that the moment was over. Oh well, I'll get more time with you at some point, Naruto-kun. Later at the ceremony location. Naruto was dressed in his clan robes, which had the same spiral design that his other outfits had. Of course it was orange with black hakama. He was not quite used to the way these clothes felt. He of course still had a stupid grin on his face, not the famous one, the one that basically just said he got laid. Naruto, you have this stupid grin on your face. You look like you did. Jiraiya couldn't have been more proud of his student. Of course pride was placed in the wrong place. But I suggest you not grin like that. Women tend to not like it if you slept with someone else on your wedding day. Naruto nodded his head and shifted it into his usual grin, which wouldn't get him killed. He looked out into the clearing, seeing the people file in slowly. He was amazed at how many people were showing up. Wow, a lot of people. Good thing we didn't write our own vows. I couldn't recite that stuff in front of all these people. Naruto, let's hope this wedding doesn't get too loud or insane. Then again, I'm full rested. Gaara commented, being the ever-pleasant case cage that he was known to be. Naruto had to slap himself though, since he was starting to get nervous, and who would blame him? He was about to get married. Calm down kid, nothing is gonna go wrong. Bridezilla made sure everything was going to go as planned. Shikamaru calmly said as he stepped forward. That troublesome woman is making sure you don't run away, so I have to use my clan's jutsu to hold you in place if you try to run away. At which point we tie you up and the wedding goes on as planned. But Naruto, why do you like these troublesome women? I dunno, I guess they have something I like. They keep me on my toes, and they keep me in line. Naruto grinned some about ready to walk out to the altar where he was supposed to wait. Bad news. Tsunade-sama got drunk, Shizune declared as she ran up to the front of the area. Fortunately Jiraiya was there to do the ceremony. Question is, would they let him? I can do it. Jiraiya declared as he walked out and stood at the altar where Tsunade would be, and everyone was frightened, very frightened. There were children present for crying out loud. Relax. There is a time and place for perversions. Today isn't one of those times. Naruto decided to take his place in front of the altar and decided it was time to get things started. That's when the traditional wedding march began to play, and first Sakura walked out and took her spot off to the side, then the shy Hinata. Gaara and Shikamaru were standing beside Naruto, and then that's when Inoichi walked in leading his daughter up to the front. It almost looked as if he was going to cry. You may be seated. Jiraiya spoke and everyone took their seats. This was probably the most joyous occasion in all of Konoha in some time. The next Hokage was getting married, and Tsunade was passed out in the back. We are here to observe as Naruto Uzumaki and Ino Yamanaka begin the great journey of their lives. Although, this will be the first step in a much more perilous journey for Naruto. We look on in admiration for their commitment for one another. Now, for the exchanging of vows. Jiraiya finished the opening sermon deal and pointed to Naruto. He wasn't the kind to make a happy day into a drawn-out showboating occasion. I, Naruto Uzumaki, take Ino Yamanaka to be my loving wife, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. Naruto began as he gazed longingly at Ino as he held her hands in his. The people witnessing this were all shocked to say the least, since they never expected Naruto to conduct himself seriously. For all the days we shall be together, I shall love you, my partner and my wife. I will always love you, now and forevermore. Jiraiya then pointed to Ino since it was her turn to speak her vows. It was amazing that Jiraiya had conducted himself seriously since he was a pervert. They had all expected him to open up with something about how Naruto is going to live out every man's fantasy. I, Ino Yamanaka, take Naruto Uzumaki to be my loving husband, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. For all our days, not matter how hard they be, I shall always love you, my partner and my husband. Now and forevermore. Ino smiled happily at Naruto as she finished speaking her vows, though she said hers slightly different. She was so happy she didn't seem to take notice that her bridesmaids were ogling Naruto. Talk about unusual weddings. Work together as shinobi and kunoichi, but more importantly as husband and wife. It is only through the partnership of husband and wife that you two can achieve true harmony. Now if anyone has any objection, speak now or forever hold your peace. Jiraiya spoke. No one did but one Sasuke Uchiha, who was raising his hand. Besides Sasuke Uchiha, who is just jealous. Jiraiya interjected, and since there were no further objections. If there are no further objections, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Naruto and Ino just did that, kissing each other passionately but not deeply. It wasn't vulgar either. It was just a simple passionate kiss between husband and wife. Of course shinobi didn't exchange rings when they got married since they got in the way of their job. The two broke from their kiss smiling happily, and Jiraiya turned them to face the well-wishers. I present, Naruto and Ino Uzumaki. And then the Toad Sage pushed the two newlyweds forward, sending them down the aisle as people cheered. Once outside, all the women gathered up, but it was a competition between the women that wanted to be the next bride of Naruto that gathered. Ino turned around and threw her bouquet over her shoulders. Naruto and the other guys just winced at the horror that is women fighting over the wedding bouquet. Ouch, that's gonna leave a mark. Naruto yelled as he saw Sakura punch a girl for trying to grab the bouquet, but eventually it was decided. The winner of the bouquet toss by sheer will was Haku. I did not see that happening. If I can have your attention please everyone. We will be gathering at the Shodai dining hall for the reception. Naruto called out as he and Ino headed off ahead of everyone else. But the second round of the bouquet obtaining contest was beginning. Haku had to maintain ownership of the bouquet for a bit longer before she was the real winner. This is to determine who is deserving of Naruto more. Called out one of the girls as the fight began anew, at the dining hall. You actually got me some ramen for the reception. I never expected you to do that for me, Ino. Naruto said with a smile. Ino smiled in return despite her hate of the fattening food. She liked Naruto to be happy. If serving noodles was the way to do it, she got off easy. Only for you, Naruto-kun. Ino smiled softly at her husband as they walked to their table and sat down. The feast of course was an incredible one, but they couldn't start till the guests arrived. The champion of the bouquet toss was decided. Man, that was hilarious. Who knew Hinata could fight like that? She must really want to marry Naruto or something. Kiba called out as he laughed while they walked into the dining hall. Hinata wasn't far behind as she staggered and looking battle-worn. She held up the bouquet like a victorious conqueror until she was tackled by Hana, who took it away. The contest begins anew. Kiba shouted as they watched the women start fighting over the bouquet again, but it quickly ended when Tayuya snatched it from Hana. No one dared to try and take the bouquet away from a temperamental redhead, no one except Tamari. Okay, that's enough of the bouquet fight. Naruto shouted to the girls as Anko leapt in and took the bouquet away. Anko quickly lost it to Kurenai, who used genjutsu, and she lost it to Shizune. Naruto's eye twitched as he watched the contest continue on. Apparently they were deciding still. But it all ended when a battle-scarred Hinata and Haku ended up taking the bouquet from Shizune at the same time. The bouquet was torn in half. Okay, it's over now. I shall marry Naruto-kun next. Hinata said as she caught her breath, before she noticed Haku had the other half. That's enough, girls. It's not that important, you will all get to marry me at some point. Naruto calmly explained as the girls watched each other as if paranoid. Naruto sighed some, it was quite the scene. But now they could eat. A bit later, Naruto had eaten his fair share of food and was sighing contentedly. That's when Tayuya walked up to the table. Naruto wondered what she had wanted. He could only imagine the horror she was about to unleash upon him. Naruto, I'm pregnant, the redhead blurted out, and Naruto just became a pillar of stone at the 3 words. Naruto then fell face first right into a piece of wedding cake. Gonna be a daddy, he mumbled out as he was still in shock. He had no idea that this would happen. He really had no idea, and that's when Ino grabbed him by the ear. Sweetie, were cheating on me before you were told to marry several women? Ino asked as she twisted his ear. No. Ah. Naruto cried out in pain as his wife twisted his ear. Actually, bimbo, it all happened 2 nights ago. We went drinking and the next morning we were in bed together. And he will marry me. Tayuya was a very grouchy woman. Must be the hormones. Then again, she might just be acting like Tayuya. Okay then, but he better not make a habit of this. Ino shouted at her husband, who simply looked up through the skylight. Kami. You're a woman, aren't you? An expected response considering the insanity he was subjugated to. Thanks for watching, guys.